Chapter 1, The Watchmaker's Daughter. The smell of machine oil and brass filings had been the scent of safety for as long as Eleanor Marsh could remember. Even now, standing in the doorway of her father's workshop on a gray October morning in 1987, she breathed it in like a familiar prayer. The shop hadn't changed in 40 years, the same wooden workbench scarred with decades of careful cuts, the same amber light filtering through windows that never seemed quite clean, the same methodical tick-tick-tick of a dozen clocks in various states of repair. Her father wasn't there. Eleanor set her purse on the counter beside the brass register, its keys worn smooth by her mother's fingers, then her own. She was 52 now, though strangers often guessed younger. Her hair had gone silver early, like her father's had, but her hands remained steady. A watchmaker's hands. She'd inherited that too, along with the shop, along with the silence that had settled between them in recent years like dust on untouched surfaces. He'd called her the night before. Not to chat, they rarely did that anymore, but with a strange urgency in his voice that she hadn't heard since her mother's funeral 15 years ago. "Ellie," he'd said, using the childhood name he'd long abandoned. "I need you to come to the shop tomorrow. Early. Before I open. There's something I have to show you." "What is it, Dad?" A long pause. She could hear his breathing, labored and thin. He was 79 now, though he still worked 6 days a week, still kept the same hours he'd maintained since returning from the war in 1946. "Not over the phone," he'd finally said. "Just come. Please." Now she moved through the workshop, trailing her fingers along the familiar surfaces. The cabinet where he kept his loops and tweezers. The velvet-lined trays of tiny gears and springs, organized with obsessive precision. The photographs on the wall, her mother, young and laughing, before the illness. Eleanor herself at 10, holding up her first successfully repaired pocket watch, her father's hand on her shoulder, his smile genuine and unguarded in a way it would never quite be again. She found the note on his workbench, tucked beneath a half-disassembled mantel clock. His handwriting, always so precise, looked shaky. Rushed. "Ellie, had to go to the VA hospital. Chest pains. Didn't want to wake you in the middle of the night. The key is in the cigar box. 3rd drawer. You'll know what to do with what you find. I should have told you years ago. I'm sorry. Dad." Eleanor's hands were shaking as she pulled open the 3rd drawer. The cigar box sat alone in the otherwise empty space, made of cedar, its corners reinforced with tarnished brass. She'd never seen it before, which meant her father had hidden it deliberately, had kept it separate from everything else in his meticulous, ordered world. Inside were papers. Official papers, brittle with age, stamped with seals she recognized from old war films. Classified. Department of Defense. Project Covenant. And beneath those, photographs. Black and white. Men in military uniforms standing beside what looked like hospital beds. Men in hospital gowns, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow and staring. One of those faces was her father's. Eleanor sank onto the wooden stool, the same one she'd sat on as a girl, watching him work, learning the patience that horology demanded. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she lifted the photographs closer to the amber light. Yes. That was definitely him. Younger, thinner, his hair still dark. But something in his eyes, something broken, something terrified, made him look like a stranger. Beneath the photographs was a letter, typed on official stationery, dated September 1952. She began to read, and the workshop around her seemed to grow colder with every word. "Dear Corporal Marsh, you are hereby reminded that your participation in Project Covenant remains classified under the National Security Act. Any disclosure of the procedures, substances, or observations conducted between 1948 and 1952 will result in immediate prosecution under federal law." The words blurred. Eleanor blinked, forced herself to focus. Outside, she could hear the morning coming alive. Cars passing on Maple Street. The bakery next door opening, its ovens already warming. Normal sounds. The sounds of a world that made sense, that followed rules, that promised if you worked hard and kept your head down and fixed what was broken, everything would eventually tick along as it should. But her hands, her steady watchmaker's hands, wouldn't stop shaking as she reached for the telephone. Chapter 2, Disruption. The Veterans Affairs Hospital smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, a combination that made Eleanor's stomach turn as she walked the long corridor toward the cardiac unit. Her father's note had said chest pains, but the nurse on the phone had been vague, asking questions Eleanor couldn't answer. Was he on any medications? Did he have a history of heart disease? Had he been under unusual stress? She'd stuffed the contents of the cigar box into her purse before leaving the shop, unable to look at them again but unwilling to leave them behind. They felt heavy against her hip now, like carrying a stone. The cardiac ward was quieter than she'd expected. Pale green walls. Fluorescent lights that hummed with an electrical persistence. A nurse's station where two women in white uniforms spoke in hushed tones, glancing at clipboards. One of them looked up as Eleanor approached, her expression shifting into professional sympathy. "Eleanor Marsh? Your father is in room 304. Dr. Castellano wants to speak with you before you go in." "Is he stable?" the nurse said quickly. "But the doctor will explain." Dr. Castellano was younger than Eleanor expected, perhaps 40, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been on shift too long. He met her in a small consultation room that felt more like a closet, gesturing to one of two plastic chairs. "Your father had what we call a cardiac event," he began, settling into the chair across from her. "Not a full myocardial infarction, not a heart attack, but significant arrhythmia. His heart isn't pumping efficiently." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Will he recover?" "We've stabilized him for now. But Ms. Marsh, I need to ask you some questions about his medical history." Dr. Castellano pulled out a chart, flipping through pages covered in dense handwriting. "When we ran his blood work, we found some irregularities. Scarring in his liver tissue. Unusual protein markers. When I asked him about past medical procedures or exposures, he became agitated. Refused to answer." "What kind of exposures?" The doctor's eyes met hers, searching. "Radiation, possibly. Chemical agents. Something that caused long-term systemic damage." "Ms. Marsh, has your father ever mentioned being part of any military medical programs? Anything experimental?" The cigar box seemed to burn through her purse. Eleanor's mouth went dry. I don't know. He never talked about the war. Never. Not even to your mother. Especially not to her." Eleanor remembered her mother's face, drawn and yellow in the hospital bed, the cancer eating through her like acid. She'd been 53. Too young. The doctors had said it was aggressive, unusual, a particularly virulent form of liver cancer that seemed to have no environmental cause. Dr. Castellano was watching her carefully. "What did your mother die of?" "Liver cancer. 1972. Something flickered across his face. He made a note on the chart, underlining it twice. "Ms. Marsh, I think your father may have been exposed to something during his military service that's caused lasting damage. If I'm going to treat him effectively, I need to know what it was." These old military experiments, he stopped himself, seeming to choose his words carefully. Sometimes the government conducted tests on soldiers. They didn't always tell them what they were being exposed to. If your father was part of something like that, there should be records. You might be entitled to compensation, medical care. Can I see him? Dr. Castellano nodded slowly, closing the chart. Room 304. But please, if he tells you anything at all about his service, I need to know. It could save his life. Her father looked smaller in the hospital bed, shrunken somehow, as if the white sheets and institutional blankets were slowly erasing him. Tubes ran from his arm to and fore bag. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking the rhythm of his struggling heart. His eyes were closed, but Eleanor could tell from his breathing that he wasn't asleep. "Dad." His eyes opened. For a moment they seemed unfocused, lost, and then they found her face and something in them cleared. Relief. And fear. "You found the box," he said. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Eleanor pulled the plastic chair closer to his bed, her purse clutched in her lap. "What is Project Covenant?" Her father's hand moved on the sheets, reaching toward her. She took it. His skin felt papery, fragile, his watchmaker's fingers still bearing the tiny scars and calluses of his trade. "I was going to tell you," he said. "After your mother died, I almost did. But what good would it have done? She was already gone." "Tell me what?" He closed his eyes again. A tear traced down his cheek into the white stubble he hadn't shaved. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Eleanor had never heard before, the sound of something held too long in silence. "After the war, I came home to Fort Dix for processing. Before discharge. They asked for volunteers. Said it was patriotic. Said we'd be helping to protect America from the next war, from communist weapons, from things we couldn't imagine. They said it would take a few weeks, maybe a month. They offered extra pay. A bonus. Your mother and I were engaged. We wanted to buy a house. Start a life." He opened his eyes, looking at the ceiling, not at her. "They took us to a facility in upstate New York. An old hospital they'd converted. There were maybe 200 of us. All soldiers. All volunteers. They told us we'd be testing protective treatments. Radiation countermeasures. They said in the future, if there was another war, if the Russians used atomic weapons, our troops would need to be protected. They made it sound noble." Eleanor's hand tightened on his. "What did they do to you?" "They injected us. Different compounds, different doses. Some of us got pills. They took blood every day, sometimes twice a day. They measured everything. Our weight, our temperature, our reflexes. They made us exercise, made us sit under lamps, made us drink things that tasted like metal. Some of the men got sick right away. Vomiting, seizures. They took those men away. We never saw them again." The monitor beeped steadily. Outside the room, someone laughed, the sound jarring and wrong. "I was in the group that didn't get sick right away. That's what they wanted to know," they said. "The threshold. How much could a body take before it failed? They kept increasing the doses. Kept injecting us. I was there for 4 months, Ellie. 4 months. When they finally let me go, they made me sign papers. They said if I ever told anyone, I'd go to prison. They said it was a matter of national security. They said I was a patriot." His voice cracked. Eleanor felt tears on her own cheeks now, hot and bitter. "I came home and married your mother. We bought the shop. We had you. I thought it was over. I thought I'd gotten away clean." He turned his head to look at her finally, his eyes red and desperate. "But then your mother got sick. And the doctors couldn't explain it. And I knew. God help me, Ellie, I knew what I'd done to her." Eleanor couldn't speak. The room tilted around her, the walls pressing in. "I poisoned her," her father whispered. "Whatever they put in me, it came out in other ways. In our bed. In our life. In our child." The word hung between them like a guillotine blade. "The papers in the box," Eleanor managed. "They're proof. Some. Not all. They destroyed most of it. But I kept what I could. Letters. Photographs. Names of other men. I've been writing to them, tracking them down. Or trying to. Most are dead now. Cancer, mostly. Liver, lung, bone. Their wives too. Some of their children. He gripped her hand with surprising strength. You need to get tested, Ellie. Promise me. Whatever they put in me, it might be in you too. You need to know. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. The monitor beeped. Outside, the world continued its ordinary rotation, people living ordinary lives, unaware that beneath the surface of normalcy, in cigar boxes and classified files and hospital beds, the truth waited like a landmine. Eleanor looked at her father, this man she'd known all her life and never known at all, and nodded. I promise, she said. And Dad? I'm going to find out what they did to you. All of it. His eyes closed again, but this time something like peace settled over his features. I was hoping you'd say that, he whispered. The cigar box. There's a name at the bottom. Under the false bottom. Start there. Chapter 3, Revelation. The false bottom of the cigar box had been so carefully constructed that Eleanor almost missed it entirely. She sat at her kitchen table at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, the contents of the box spread before her like evidence at a crime scene. It was only when she lifted the box to examine its corners more carefully that she felt the weight shift wrong, heard the faint rattle of something loose beneath what should have been solid cedar. A thin blade slipped between the seams revealed the truth, a second compartment, shallow but deliberate, containing 3 items her father had hidden even from his own confession. The first was a photograph, different from the others. Not official. Not stamped or filed. A personal snapshot, creased and faded, showing a group of young men in hospital gowns standing outside a brick building. They were smiling, some of them, but their smiles had the brittle quality of prisoners trying to convince themselves they'd volunteered for their own captivity. Her father stood third from the left, his arm around another man's shoulders. Someone had written on the back in pencil, Building 7, March 1950. The lucky ones. The second item was a list of names, handwritten in her father's careful script. 37 names, each followed by a location and a date. Some of the dates were from the 1950s and 60s. Others were more recent. Beside many of the names, her father had written a single word, deceased. Beside a few others, no response. And beside 3, confirmed. The third item was what her father had meant for her to find. A business card, yellowed with age but still legible. Dr. Vera Chen, Epidemiology Department, Columbia University. A phone number had been added in blue ink below the printed text, along with a note in her father's handwriting, she believed me. Eleanor called the number at 9 o'clock the next morning, after spending 3 sleepless hours reading and rereading every document in the cigar box, committing names and dates to memory, trying to construct a narrative from fragments. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional despite the early hour. Dr. Chen's office. I'm looking for Dr. Vera Chen. My name is Eleanor Marsh. My father. Henry Marsh. The voice changed instantly, warming with recognition. Is he all right? I haven't heard from him in months. Eleanor's throat tightened. He's in the hospital. Cardiac problems. He gave me your name. He said you believed him. A pause. Then, can you come to my office? Today if possible. This isn't a conversation for the telephone. Columbia University sprawled across Upper Manhattan like an academic fortress, its limestone buildings heavy with the weight of history and secrets. Dr. Chen's office was in the School of Public Health, a newer structure of glass and steel that seemed incongruous among its older neighbors. Eleanor had taken the train from Connecticut, the cigar box and all its contents locked in her briefcase, her hands never leaving the handle. Dr. Vera Chen was older than Eleanor expected, perhaps 65, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that magnified dark, intelligent eyes. She ushered Eleanor into an office lined floor to ceiling with books and file cabinets, gesturing to a chair before closing the door firmly and drawing the blinds. Your father is a brave man, she said without preamble, settling behind her desk. One of the few willing to speak on record about Project Covenant. How much has he told you? That he was injected with something. Radiation countermeasures, they called it. That it made him sick. Made my mother sick. That most of the other men are dead. Dr. Chen nodded slowly, as if Eleanor had confirmed something she already knew. Project Covenant wasn't about radiation countermeasures. That was the cover story. It was about plutonium. The word fell like a stone into still water. They were testing weapons-grade plutonium on American soldiers, Dr. Chen continued, her voice steady but edged with controlled fury. Injecting it directly into the bloodstream in varying doses to study dispersal patterns, absorption rates, and long-term biological effects. They wanted to know what would happen to enemy populations if we deployed plutonium-based dirty bombs. Or what would happen to our own troops if they were exposed during nuclear warfare. Your father and the other men in Project Covenant were human test subjects in radiation experiments that violated every medical and ethical standard, even by 1950s criteria. Eleanor felt the room tilt. The government poisoned them deliberately. The government, the military, and civilian contractors working under the Atomic Energy Commission. Project Covenant was one of several such experiments conducted between 1945 and 1974. Most have been declassified now, after congressional hearings in the 1990s. But Covenant remains partially sealed. The official files admit to radiation exposure studies but claim all subjects were fully informed volunteers who suffered no lasting harm. Dr. Chen's mouth twisted bitterly. Both claims are lies. She stood and moved to one of the filing cabinets, pulling out a thick folder bulging with papers. Your father started contacting me 3 years ago. He'd seen news coverage of the radiation hearings, the government's formal apology to victims of other experiments. He thought Covenant might finally be acknowledged. But when he tried to get his medical records from the VA, he was told they'd been destroyed in a fire. When he contacted other survivors, he found most were dead or dying. Those who were alive were terrified to speak. The classification remains in effect. Technically, your father is still breaking federal law by discussing this with anyone, including you. Eleanor opened her briefcase with shaking hands, removing the documents from the cigar box. He kept proof. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she examined the papers, the photographs, handling them with the careful reverence of an archaeologist uncovering artifacts. These are extraordinary. I've been trying to get documentation like this for years. Most of it was destroyed or remains locked in government archives. Do you know what this means? It means my father is dying of something the government did to him 60 years ago. It means, Dr. Chen said carefully, that we might finally be able to force full declassification. Force an admission. Force compensation for victims and their families. Your father isn't just sick, Ms. Marsh. He's evidence. Eleanor felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. What about me? He said I should get tested. That whatever they put in him might be in me too. Dr. Chen's face softened for the first time, a flicker of genuine sympathy crossing her features. Plutonium is persistent. It doesn't break down in the body the way other radioactive materials do. It concentrates in bone tissue, in the liver, in the reproductive organs. It can be passed through intimate contact, through childbirth, possibly through genetic mutation. We don't know the full extent because these studies have never been completed. The government shut down follow-up research when the experiments came under scrutiny. So I could be contaminated. You should be tested, yes. But Ms. Marsh, you need to understand what you're getting into. If you go public with this, if you push for investigation, there will be consequences. These projects remain classified for a reason. People in power want them to stay buried. Your father has been threatened. So have I. There are forces that would prefer this particular truth stay hidden forever. Eleanor thought of her father in his hospital bed, tears on his weathered cheeks, confessing to a sin that had never been his to bear. She thought of her mother's yellow skin, her rasping breath in those final days, the way the cancer had consumed her from the inside out. She thought of the shop, the clocks, the careful precision of a life spent fixing things that were broken. "What would I need to do?" she asked quietly. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes intense behind her glasses. "First, we document everything. Your father's testimony, your family medical history, the contents of that cigar box. Second, we find the other survivors on that list, the ones marked confirmed. If even 2 or 3 will speak on record, we have the beginning of a case. Third, we file a Freedom of Information Act request for the complete Covenant files. They'll fight it, but with enough evidence, we can force disclosure. And then we go public. Media, congressional hearings, lawsuits. We make enough noise that they can't bury it again. We force accountability." Eleanor looked down at the documents spread across Dr. Chen's desk. Her father's handwriting. Strangers' faces. Dates and doses and death certificates. The accumulated weight of a secret that had shaped her entire life without her knowledge. "There's something else," Dr. Chen said quietly. She pulled a single sheet from her own files, sliding it across the desk. "This is a partial list of known Covenant sites. The main facility was in upstate New York, as your father said. But there were satellite locations. Including one in Connecticut." Eleanor's eyes scanned the list. Her vision tunneled when she reached the entry Dr. Chen had highlighted. St. Raphael Hospital, New Haven, Connecticut. 1952 to 1956, follow-up observations and family exposure studies. "That's where I was born," Eleanor whispered. 1955, St. Raphael. Dr. Chen's silence was confirmation enough. Eleanor sat back in her chair, the pieces assembling themselves into a picture she'd been staring at her whole life without seeing. The careful distance her father had always maintained. The way he'd never wanted her to go into medicine, had steered her toward watchmaking instead, toward fixing things that couldn't bleed. The strange sadness that had always haunted him, even in happy moments. "They didn't just study him," she said. "They studied me too. From the beginning." "I don't have proof of that," Dr. Chen said carefully. "The records from St. Raphael are among those reportedly destroyed. But yes, it's possible. Likely, even. Children of Covenant subjects would have been scientifically valuable. A second generation. A way to track longitudinal effects." Eleanor's hands were steady again, the initial shock crystallizing into something harder, colder, more useful. She gathered the documents back into her briefcase with methodical precision, her movements measured and exact. "The 3 names on my father's list," she said. "The ones marked confirmed. Where are they?" Dr. Chen smiled, a fierce expression that had nothing to do with joy. "I know where 2 of them are. And Ms. Marsh? They're ready to talk." Chapter 4, Climax. The Congressional hearing room was smaller than Eleanor had imagined from watching them on television, but no less intimidating. Wooden panels rose to a high ceiling. American flags bracketed the elevated bench where 5 representatives sat, their faces carefully neutral. Cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights gleaming like predatory eyes. Eleanor sat at the witness table, a microphone angled toward her face, a glass of water she couldn't drink trembling in her peripheral vision. To her left sat Dr. Chen, crisp and professional in a dark suit. To her right, Thomas Garrett, 76 years old, his hands gnarled with arthritis, his lungs destroyed by the same plutonium that had killed his wife and 2 of his 3 children. Behind them, in the gallery, her father watched from a wheelchair, oxygen tubing snaking into his nose. He'd insisted on coming despite Dr. Castellano's warnings. "I need to see this," he'd said. "I need to know it meant something." It had taken 8 months to reach this moment. 8 months of FOIA requests and denied appeals. 8 months of tracking down survivors, most too sick or too frightened to participate. 8 months of Eleanor's own medical tests, the results confirming what she'd already known in her bones: elevated plutonium levels in her tissue, consistent with prenatal and early childhood exposure. She was contaminated. Had been from the beginning. The night before, she'd asked Dr. Chen what they should expect. Denial, Dr. Chen had said flatly. They'll claim the documents are incomplete, that the context is missing, that the science was different then. They'll hide behind national security. They'll suggest your father and the others are unreliable witnesses, that their memories are compromised by age and illness. They'll do everything except tell the truth. Now, Representative Morrison, chair of the Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, cleared his throat into his microphone. He was younger than the others, barely 50, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never been forced to question his own invincibility. Ms. Marsh, thank you for your testimony today. I want to be clear that this subcommittee takes allegations of misconduct very seriously. However, we must also be mindful of national security concerns and the context of the Cold War era. Can you state for the record your relationship to the alleged Project Covenant? Eleanor's voice was steady. She'd practiced this. My father, Henry Marsh, was injected with weapons-grade plutonium without informed consent at a classified military facility in 1949. I am his daughter, born in 1955, contaminated in utero with the same radioactive material. My mother died of radiation-induced cancer in 1972. I am here to demand full declassification of Project Covenant records and compensation for victims and their families. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Morrison's expression didn't change. Ms. Marsh, the Department of Defense has provided this committee with a summary of historical radiation studies. While we acknowledge certain experiments occurred, the documentation indicates all participants were volunteers who received medical monitoring. Do you have evidence contradicting this? Dr. Chen leaned forward, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Representative Morrison, the evidence is sitting in front of you. Medical records showing deliberate plutonium injection. Photographs of non-consenting human subjects. Death certificates of 31 Project Covenant participants, average age of death 54. Government memos discussing acceptable losses. This isn't ambiguous. Morrison shuffled papers, a practiced gesture of dismissal. Dr. Chen, I appreciate your expertise, but these documents are fragmentary. The original files were destroyed to prevent exactly this conversation, Dr. Chen interrupted. Representative, I have spent 15 years documenting Cold War radiation experiments. Every time survivors come forward, they're told the records are lost, destroyed, or classified. The pattern is clear. This is systematic cover-up. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact. The tension in the room shifted, sharpened. Eleanor watched Representative Morrison's jaw tighten, watched him glance towards someone in the back of the room, a man in a dark suit she didn't recognize, standing near the exit. Thomas Garrett leaned toward his microphone, his voice a wheeze from damaged lungs. I was 23 years old. They told me I was protecting my country. They injected me 17 times over 4 months. When I started vomiting blood, they wrote it down in their charts and gave me another injection. My wife nursed me when I came home. The plutonium killed her. My son was born with holes in his heart. My daughter died of leukemia at 16. You want evidence? I'm evidence. My dead family is evidence. How much more do you need? Silence. Heavy and damning. Representative Kowalski, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, spoke for the first time. Mr. Garrett, I'm deeply sorry for your losses. Ms. Marsh, for yours as well. I've reviewed the materials Dr. Chen submitted, and I have questions the DoD representatives have failed to adequately address. Specifically, why were Project Covenant records exempted from the 1995 declassification of radiation experiments? Why is this particular program still protected? Morrison's face flushed. Representative Kowalski, the DoD has explained that certain operational details remain sensitive. Operational details. Kowalski's voice rose. These people were injected with plutonium. Their families are dying. What possible operational detail justifies continued classification 70 years later? The man in the dark suit moved. Eleanor tracked him as he approached the bench, leaning down to whisper in Morrison's ear. Morrison's expression flickered, annoyance, then something harder. Resignation. This subcommittee will take a 15-minute recess, he announced abruptly. Representative Morrison, Kowalski began. 15 minutes, he repeated, and brought down the gavel. In the anteroom, Dr. Chen paced like a caged animal. They're going to bury it. Did you see that man? DOD legal counsel, I'd bet my career on it. They're crafting language right now to acknowledge minimal wrongdoing while maintaining classification. We'll get an apology and nothing else. Eleanor stood at the window, looking down at the street below. Tourists taking photographs. A hot dog vendor. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that above them, the machinery of government was deciding whether truth mattered more than convenience. Her father's wheelchair creaked as Thomas Garrett rolled it closer. Her father's hand found hers, squeezed weakly. Whatever happens, he said, you did this. You made them look. That's more than I ever thought possible. Eleanor turned to face them, her dying father, her partner in contamination, the woman who believed when no one else would. Through the window, she could see her own reflection superimposed over the city, a ghost caught between worlds. It's not enough, she said quietly. An apology isn't enough. Dr. Chen stopped pacing. What are you thinking? Eleanor reached into her briefcase, pulling out a single document she hadn't shown the committee. The one she'd been saving. Her own medical report, with her daughter's name listed as next of kin. I have a daughter, she said. She's 28. I never told her about any of this because I was ashamed, because I wanted to protect her from knowing she might be carrying this poison too. But she deserves to know. They all deserve to know. Every child, every grandchild of every person they contaminated. She looked at Dr. Chen. Can you get this to the press? Now, before they gavel back in. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. You're talking about going around the committee entirely. I'm talking about making it impossible to bury. If the story breaks while we're still in session, if reporters are calling for comment before Morrison can control the narrative. They'll retaliate, Dr. Chen warned. You could face charges for violating classification orders. Eleanor thought of her daughter, Sarah, working in Seattle, unaware that her grandmother's death and her mother's silence were links in a chain forged by men who'd valued data over humanity. Then let them come, she said. I'm done protecting their secrets. Dr. Chen pulled out her phone. Chapter 5, Resolution and Reflection. The story broke during the recess. By the time Representative Morrison reconvened the hearing, 3 major newspapers had already posted breaking news alerts online. Government admits plutonium experiments on U.S. soldiers. Cold War radiation tests contaminated 3 generations. Project Covenant, the experiment that poisoned American families. Eleanor watched Morrison's face as an aide whispered the news to him. She saw the exact moment he understood that control had slipped away, that the careful language being crafted in back rooms no longer mattered. The truth was loose in the world now, multiplying with every share and retweet, beyond the reach of classification stamps and convenient fires. Morrison cleared his throat, his earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed anger. Ms. Marsh, did you provide classified materials to the press during our recess? I provided my own medical records, Eleanor said calmly. Which belong to me. And which tell a story the American people have a right to hear. The hearing ended in chaos 20 minutes later. Kowalski called for a full investigation with subpoena power. Morrison insisted on reviewing proper protocols. The DOD legal counsel tried to invoke executive privilege. The cameras recorded everything. Eleanor left the building with her father, Thomas Garrett, and Dr. Chen, descending the marble steps into a wall of reporters and microphones. She made a brief statement, her voice steady, her father's hand in hers. Then they climbed into a waiting car and drove away, leaving the questions and camera flashes behind. Her father died 6 weeks later, in the same hospital where his confession had begun. Eleanor was with him at the end, holding his watchmaker's hands as his heart finally failed, worn out by decades of carrying poison in his blood and secrets in his soul. "Did it matter?" he whispered in one of his last lucid moments. "What we did?" Eleanor thought of the headlines that had followed them for weeks. The other families who'd come forward, emboldened by their testimony. The government task force being formed to investigate Cold War radiation experiments. The preliminary settlement offers being discussed for victims and descendants. Yes, she told him. It mattered. He smiled then, a real smile, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen since childhood. Good. That's good. He closed his eyes and didn't open them again. The full declassification of Project Covenant files came 14 months after the hearing, forced by congressional pressure and threat of lawsuit. Eleanor read them in Dr. Chen's office, page after page of clinical observations documenting human suffering with the detached precision of a watchmaker cataloging broken parts. Subject 847, her father, had received 17 plutonium injections totaling 6.8 microcuries, a dose the researchers knew would cause long-term damage but was sublethal in immediate terms. They'd tracked his health for years through VA records without his knowledge, noting his wife's cancer, Eleanor's birth, treating them all as data points in an ongoing experiment. There were memos discussing whether to continue monitoring second and third generation subjects or whether natural attrition would eventually eliminate the evidence. There were budget discussions weighing the cost of long-term observation against the value of the data. There were recommendations that all records be destroyed in the interest of national security and public confidence. Nowhere in thousands of pages was there an acknowledgement that the subjects were human beings. That they had families. That they deserved truth. Eleanor stood in the shop on a cold November morning, 3 years after finding the cigar box. The clocks still ticked their patient rhythm. The brass register still gleamed. But the shop was quieter now, waiting. She'd closed it after her father's death, unable to bear the weight of continuing alone. She'd come to collect the last of her father's tools, to finally empty the workshop and list the building for sale. But her hands stilled on the familiar surfaces, remembering. Her daughter Sarah had come east for the settlement hearing. They'd sat together in a different government building, listening as officials apologized for historical wrongs and offered compensation that could never restore what had been taken. Sarah had been tested too. Low-level contamination, the doctors said. Probably not dangerous. Probably. Are you angry? Sarah had asked afterward. At Grandpa, for not telling you sooner? Eleanor had considered the question carefully. He was trying to protect me. That's what parents do. Even when protection means carrying unbearable weight alone. Is that why you didn't tell me? Yes. And I was wrong. He was wrong. But we were wrong because someone else made us victims first, and then made us complicit in our own silence. Sarah had taken her hand then, her grip strong and sure. It stops with me, she'd said. This chain. I won't have children. I won't pass this forward. It ends. Eleanor had wanted to argue, to say that life was worth the risk, that love mattered more than fear. But she'd only nodded, recognizing in her daughter's fierce certainty the same determination that had driven her to that congressional hearing, to the reporters' microphones, to this moment of standing in her father's shop and deciding what to preserve and what to let go. She found one last item in the bottom drawer of the workbench. A pocket watch, the first one she'd ever repaired successfully, the one from the photograph on the wall. Her father had kept it all these years, had wound it periodically to keep it running. Eleanor opened the case. Inside, he'd engraved a message she'd never noticed before, the letters tiny and precise. Time reveals all truths. For Eleanor, who fixed what was broken. She closed the watch carefully, feeling its weight in her palm, its steady tick against her skin. Then she slipped it into her pocket and walked out of the shop, locking the door behind her. The settlement money would go to other victims' families, to research into radiation exposure, to ensuring the experiments were taught in schools so future generations would know what had been done in the name of national security. Her father's testimony, preserved in congressional records, would outlive them all. The experiment was supposed to stay classified forever. But secrets, like plutonium, have a half-life. Eventually, inevitably, they decay into something that can be measured, documented, and finally understood. Eleanor walked down Maple Street in the autumn sunlight, the watch ticking steadily in her pocket, keeping time with a heart that had learned to beat despite the poison it carried, a rhythm of resilience that would echo forward into whatever came next. The clocks in the shop behind her continued their patient count, marking the slow passage of truth toward light, as they always had, as they always would, faithful in their purpose even when no one remained to hear.